Hello, I'm Amy Brodesky, and I work at Education Development Center in Massachusetts. I'm very excited to be presenting today with Jessica Hunt, Judy Storeygard, and Karen Mutch-Jones. So before we get started, we just want to take a minute to just acknowledge what challenging times we're in right now, and we really appreciate that you're joining us today. Our session focuses on equity, so we'd like to begin by sharing this call to the math education community from the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. So as we're committed to working on anti-racism and improving systemic change, we really need to use mathematics as an analytic tool to challenge power, privilege, and oppression. So I encourage you to just take a moment to look over the statement. At today's session, all of our projects share a commitment to this central question, which is supporting what are ways to support educators in providing instruction that's high quality and inclusive, and empower students with disabilities and difficulties as mathematics thinkers and doers. One thing that we all agree on is the need for some essential shifts, starting from viewing students with a deficit model that focuses on things that they can't do, to moving to strength-based approaches where we can identify strengths, build on strengths, and really help students grow mathematically. So I'd like you to share from your experiences, what are ways to help educators shift to strengths-based instruction? If you'd be willing to add one or two ideas in the chat, that would be wonderful. In today's agenda, each of us will present our projects, and during those presentations, we encourage you to write questions in the chat. Karen will moderate the chat, and we'll come back together at the end to respond to your questions. One thing that really excited us in planning this presentation is the common themes we discovered in the planning process. So we're three independent projects in different locations focusing on different target audiences, but we all share this commitment to supporting educators in empowering their students as math thinkers and doers. And our PD approaches had four common themes, including focusing on student thinking, having educators do mathematics themselves, and changing beliefs about mathematics learning and students. So as you learn about the projects, we invite you to think about, what do you notice and wonder about these common themes? And we encourage you to type your ideas and questions in the chat. So I'm now going to pass this over to Judy.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Judy Storeygard, and Karen Mutch-Jones and I are delighted to be with you today to share our project, Doing the Math with Paraeducators, which we couldn't have done without our fabulous project team. So before I get started, I realize that a lot of people don't know what a paraeducator is, especially when I mumble, people think that I'm working with parents. So you may know them as teacher aides or teaching assistants or paraprofessionals, but it's essentially the same job to be part of an instructional team under the direction of a licensed educator. So our project addressed equity on two levels. First of all, the paras. The paras in our project come from underserved populations, often from the communities of the students they teach, and they form close relationships with them and their families. However, another way their situation is inequitable is that they are not well paid, and they're only paid for instructional time, and they receive little or no support to help them develop professional expertise. The other level we're addressing equity is their students. because paraeducators are often assigned to help those with learning challenges, but because they're underprepared, they cannot offer the appropriate level or type of support. There isn't a lot of research on this, but there was a large study in the UK that showed that paras were often engaged in task completion or task monitoring, whereas teachers were more able to engage their students in conversation and reasoning. Michael G. and Greco of the University of Vermont has also done some studies in this area. We planned, through our support from the National Science Foundation, to develop a model for a paraprofessional PD. We worked in the Boston Public Schools, kindergarten through grade 3, and we provided 30 hours of professional development and engaged in the research tasks that you see on the slide. One of the things we needed to do first was to build trust, and while you would also do that with teachers, it was even more important with the paras because they don't have the same level of education teachers do. They haven't taken courses in child development or in assessment or curriculum, and most of them have had really not successful experiences with mathematics. So we affirmed the importance of the paraeducator role, acknowledged the challenges, and we created a safe environment. I remember on the very first day, we asked them how many tens are in 263, and one of the paras raised their hand and said, I don't understand why it's not 6. And our professional development provider, who you'll see on the next page, Jan Rook, who's a retired teacher, stopped in her tracks, and she said, let's celebrate this moment that that you were willing to share your confusion. And it was really a pivotal moment and helped us build a real community. And by encouraging them to support each other and work in small groups, that also helped build the trust. So the other things we focused on, and it goes along with trust, is to increase their comfort and enjoyment of mathematics and ultimately their confidence in doing math together. And as I said, we gave them lots of opportunities to solve problems together. Because we were working K to 3, we really focused on the number system and place value, and also the awareness that there are multiple ways to think about and solve a problem. For most of the paras, the standard algorithm was the only way that they knew, or even knew that there were other ways. This picture, the teacher in the back, the para in the back who's talking, she was saying, it was during our October meeting, which was the first time they'd gone back to school since the summer, and she was saying all the strategies we used during the summer, our students are doing the same thing. And as she said the same thing, all of them talked with her in unison because for them it was also a very aha moment for them when they saw that their students were also using the same strategies. And we had them write a journal and do reflections during the PD, and I don't know if you can see it, but it's a para that is solving 203 minus 96, and she tries different ways. And at the bottom she writes, try not to do it the old-fashioned way, and try new ways, and practice, practice, practice. So they were very engaged, to learn all these new things and share them with each other. The other thing we needed to do was do a practice-based PD. We didn't have the time to do an entire mathematics content course. So we wanted to familiarize them with the district curriculum and resources. Most of them had not used a number line or hundreds chart. They didn't really have an understanding of what's expected at each grade level or what the content was of math activities. The other part of our practice-based approach was that we spent a lot of time analyzing their student work, and this was really important in getting them to understand the importance of differentiating. At first, they brought samples of their own student work to the PD, and they discussed it in multi-grade groups, K to 3. And this turned out to be really positive because they really liked seeing how ideas develop through the grade level. The kindergarten teachers, paras, didn't have an idea of how learning to count in kindergarten could help students later on be fluent with counting in multiple groups, and they really found that very useful. Later, we were fortunate to get a supplement from the National Science Foundation to use our first group of paras who really wanted to continue to become para leaders or mentors. And our professional development with them focused on helping them develop the skills to facilitate looking at student work meetings for our new para mentors. They met in our sessions, and we had a set of problems from one problem and about 6 or 7 samples of different students' approaches. And they used a protocol, describe, interpret, evaluate, think about next steps. And as you might imagine, the hardest part was getting them to step back and describe rather than to jump in and say, oh, this student didn't know that, or they were wrong, their answer's wrong. And they were being told to focus on describing by the para-facilitator, who was one of their colleagues. And having one of their colleagues facilitate was really important for them. They all really valued it and were proud that a para was facilitating their para meetings. So our findings were that the paras really appreciated the complexity of learning math and the need for differentiated instruction. They began really listening for student thinking and not focusing on the answer. And they were able to use the tools and resources that we offered them during PD. And the fact that they had experienced the range of strategies themselves and also looked at them in the student work gave them a repertoire of strategies to be familiar with when they were looking at student work in their classroom. And I'll talk about the last 2 points in a minute. So when we observed the paras, we were, some of the things we noticed, we were really pleased that they were asking questions to promote math thinking. And they were encouraging the students to show their thinking through drawing or demonstrating. And instead of saying that students were wrong, they used the mistakes as a learning opportunity and work with the students to double check by using different math resources or to work with a partner. We did have some support for classroom teachers because classroom teachers are never given support on how to supervise or collaborate with paras. We had a half-day professional development session where we brought the paras and the teachers together. We really wanted to emphasize that they were a team. So one of our activities, you can see on these charts, we asked both of them separately first, the paras and the teachers, what are some ways that you can work together in this project to support your students in math? And then we compared what the paras wrote and what the teachers wrote, which were actually pretty similar, and emphasized collaborating and sharing resources together. We also gave them a monthly planning protocol, which was a structured form to help them focus their discussion. It said things like, you know, what is something this month that you could celebrate a success with a student? What are your goals for the next few weeks in math? And this was very challenging for them to fill out because of the time constraints. But when they did, they told us that having that structure was helped them focus their conversations. We also sent the teachers agendas for our PD sessions so they would know what paras were learning. And we sent both of them emails after our observations that talked about what we saw the paras doing, the strategies they were implementing, and sometimes suggestions for things to try. So I just wanted to share with you a couple of the reflections that especially focused on the differentiation. So here are the paras talking about how they learned to observe and were thinking about how students were understanding in different ways. And the teacher, this was really important to us. The more confident the paras became and the more they participated in these discussions about teaching and learning by making suggestions, by making observations about students, the teachers began to treat them more like a partner. And that was sort of a significant shift. And the paras were able to be more specific in talking about their teachers in terms of doing informal assessment. Like here are the paras saying that a student went from not being able to recognize numbers to being able to count with cubes in the number line. And the teachers saw a shift. Before the project, some of the paras would say they don't get it, or they know math, or they don't. And after the PD, they were able to find different ways to help the students and focus on how to help them and uncover what students know. And we were very excited to see that the paras saw a connection between learning and behavior, that if a student was exhibiting off-task behaviors, it might have to do with their learning. So this para said During this PD, I learned that the student is not just trying to get out of work, he's learning it a different way. That really helped me understand that everything wasn't all black and white. We didn't have the tools to help this child understand it more than this other child, but PD painted a much clearer picture. And this theme came up several times, even when we took the paras to meet with the director of equity in Boston, and one of the paras said, I know I'm not supposed to say this, but there was a student I really didn't like. And then I saw some really cool math work that the student did, and we had a wonderful conversation, and it changed our relationship. So, what works? To summarize, some of the facets of our project we think were really important were the ongoing PD, the practice-based activities, and the regular opportunities to analyze and reflect on student work. And a lot of the parents had never done reflection before. In fact, they hadn't been observed. When we observed, I think it was the first time anyone ever gave them feedback, and they really became to appreciate that and be better at reflection. And we also thought the para leadership program was important also to develop the para mentors and the support structures for collaborating teachers. So in the future, we'd like to provide more support for teachers because some of them would like a mid-year check-in, or we might do some online support so they can share strategies and dilemmas. We also want to support paras to enter the teacher pipeline. You know, in Boston, about 3/4 of the paras are paras of color, where the teachers only a little bit over 1/3. So they're a very appropriate pool for entering the teacher pipeline, but a lot of them aren't aware of the resources available, and we would like to explore giving them credit for the PD they're doing, and to be aware of funding for teacher preparation exams and things like that. We also would like to build district and building level capacity by offering more PD in the schools, and including paras on committees. One of our schools, the paras were on the math curriculum committee, and they were very active members. And we'd also like to work with principals to provide more planning time and structures for planning. So thank you so much for coming. I hope you'll put your questions and ideas in the chat, and we especially want to thank our BPS para-educators and our wonderful collaborators in the math department, Linda Davenport and Connie Henry. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Judy. Hi, I'm Jessica Hine. I am an associate professor in mathematics education and special education at North Carolina State University. I want to talk to you today about supporting asset-based models of professional learning. This work was supported by a career grant that I've been working on for the past 5 years. I couldn't have done any of this work without the many students who have worked with me over the years, so I wanted to give them a big shout out and a big thank you. So our project was designed to provide a proof of concept toward a reconceptualization of mathematics intervention practices, such that students with learning disabilities could both access and grow their fraction knowledge from their own thinking. The graphic that you see on the screen on the left shows our project goals across its 5-year run, which generally were to document an initial learning trajectory, refine it over time, so that also includes activities and pedagogical supports, and then validate the effects of teaching with such a trajectory on student learning in the final year. As I mentioned earlier, this is from an NSF career project. So along with documenting and refining the trajectories and creating the instructional program, I was also working on complementary educational activities, as you see on the right, and those are the activities that I'm going to reference today. My educational activities were designed to support teachers both within and outside of the context of the university setting. So this means that I was both building out, enacting, and refining coursework at the graduate level, as well as professional learning in teacher school communities. To begin this work, my team designed a framework for asset-based professional learning, and the graphic on the left shows the initial version of that framework. Our primary goal in this work was building up students' knowledge, or teachers' knowledge rather, of the fractional reasoning of students with learning disabilities, as well as how it could grow over time. The mechanisms that we used to support that goal were to promote curiosity and teachers' propensity to listen to and respond to student thinking. The first way that we did that was by using the trajectories of fractional reasoning that we were documenting in the main project. We saw these trajectories as a common framework for both special educators and math educators to become curious about and consider students' reasoning. We'd use things like videos of student thinking and how it grew over time and ask teachers to notice, to share what they noticed in relation to the trajectory. So often the trajectory served as a powerful way of challenging existing notions such as students with learning disabilities don't have a way of knowing, or that they can't build up their ways of knowing without being told or directly instructed. Another way that we engaged with teachers was through the use of clinical interviews, which was also a research tool that we were using in the main project, and we modified these tools for use with teachers. Clinical interviews for us served as a way for teachers to notice student thinking in a less restrictive way from things like tests or error analysis or other tools that they were using in their classroom, because it gave them a space to listen to students' reasoning, which often fed back into them becoming curious about the thinking that they observed. Teachers often commented and affirmed that these tools were supporting them to notice thinking and how it could grow. Many teachers often reported surprising things that they noticed in terms of student thinking, such as the quote on the screen, I never knew students could engage in problems that way. Other times teachers would tell us that the thinking they observed didn't fit nicely in their trajectory, which led to really nice conversations about the nonlinearity of student development. This work generally supported the view of students with disabilities as math thinkers and doers, and it supported teachers to move away from deficit models of these students and toward asset-based models of these students. Teachers also commented that the tools helped them to look at the kids as the experts. So we would have a lot of conversations around this. The kids are experts of their own reasoning because they're the only ones who really know how they think about things and how they reason about things. The tools also supported connections between teaching and listening. Teachers engaged in pedagogical moves such as restating, revoicing, and even reshowing students' reasoning as a part of the clinical interviews, and often talked about how these practices could be used as a part of their regular classroom instruction. These moves also empower students with learning disabilities because it positions their reasoning as valid and as valuable, and them as competent as learners. But there are also areas that our work didn't seem to address. So despite a lot of the positive reactions that we saw and significant increases in teacher knowledge of student thinking, we didn't seem to be doing enough to address teachers' sustained beliefs about what disability was and its implications for instruction. For instance, some of the teachers, again, reacted well to the experiences afforded by the course or the PD, yet in the same breath told us that they felt that they needed to remediate students to a particular stage of the trajectory. There were also questions about the applicability of these tools in their classroom environment. So teachers would say that they appreciated and liked using these tools, yet they didn't know how they fit into the things that they were already doing. As a result, we expanded our framework and our goal. Specifically, we added a focus on disability as a form of human variability and diversity, and we focused teachers' experience in the context of their schools and communities as a system. The focus on student reasoning remains. We continued to promote teacher curiosity and listening and responding with students' reasoning, yet we added critique as a change agent, both in terms of seeing teaching as building from students' strengths as opposed to fixing students' thinking, seeing thinking in terms of what is as opposed to what is not, and also toward an emphasis of what affordances and constraints the systems and the learning environments themselves may be placing on students' thinking and teachers' teaching. So the first way that we promoted this revised goal was with a questionnaire project. This project was first done in the context of the graduate course and now is done in both the context of PD and the course. So in this project, teachers take a bank of questions that we give them that are designed to get at beliefs about disability and implications for teaching mathematics, and they modify them or add to them in ways that they see fit for their context. They give the questions to their peers or people in their environments, and then reflect upon the results in terms of the learning environment, their classroom, their school, their district, or even their own beliefs. So the images on the screen are the results of one of the surveys a teacher in our PD presented to our group. Within this project, I also give teachers resources that support them to compare and contrast historic and modern day perspectives on how math instruction is conceptualized for students with disabilities, as well as varying lenses to consider the data that they gathered. So these lenses include, again, things like learner variability, neurodiversity, and other models of disability, such as the social model. This got teachers very curious, promoted their listening and responding as their peers presented their data through varying resources, and it also promoted a critique of the data presented and its possible implications for math instruction for students with disabilities. There's kind of the end results of that particular teacher's work. The second way that we promoted the revised goal was the holistic student project. So this was an extension of the clinical interview that we used in the beginning years of the project. Like the Disability and Math Questionnaire project, this was first done in the context of a course and then was extended out to PD settings. This project served as a way to continue our focus on student thinking, yet also expand it to include connections to other school-based resources, such as curriculum tasks. It gave us a way to introduce universal design for learning as a way to open up access in the curriculum. And it also allowed us a space to look at the good work of other projects that were using things like initial interviews and student shadowing, to promote teachers to get to know students' home context and community backgrounds in terms of their strengths. So like the questionnaire project, teachers really got into this. The picture on the screen links to a video that I would show you if I had a little bit more time to talk today. But I think the quote on the screen, which is also from the teacher who created this project, is a common thread that we saw across survey data from many of our teachers in this phase of the project. Within this new focus and these expanded experiences, teachers use their curiosity, their listening, their responding to uncover perspectives in their environments and arguably in their own minds in terms of what disability is and what it is not. They connected listening and responding to their planning practices and curriculum work that they were already doing in their schools and classrooms. A powerful thing that we learned was that the experiences supported teachers to consider students' reasoning from a platform of strengths and begin to challenge deficit constructions that they had that may have been in place for students. Teachers reported students have strengths and considered how to build from them as opposed to remediating or fixing. Another powerful thing that we learned was that the experiences supported critique of the learning environment and the systems in which we teach. So along with changing their own beliefs about students' potential, teachers began to build different views of teaching. So by looking critically at the learning environment and at their own teaching for barriers, they began to place the problem as a challenge on the design of the learning environment as opposed to the student. The quotes are all representative of teacher change, with the green being really evident to me in terms of wanting to promote that belief shift. This teacher shared, the course pushed my thinking about labels, equity, and supporting all students through a belief shift. To wrap up, we found that to support asset-based professional learning, teachers require strengths-based frameworks that promote curiosity, listening and questioning, and critiquing. They require opportunities to address and challenge beliefs, both their own and within the systems in which they work. They require actionable tools to promote student strengths in the context of teaching and combat deficit beliefs in the context of systems. And they require longitudinal opportunities to learn and reflect and talk with others about their practice. We're currently looking at sustaining and growing this work through our continued longitudinal development with partner schools in the area, as well as scalable learning community-based applications that are low or no cost, such as the creation of an online learning experience, which is often called a MOOC, so that teachers from around the globe can engage in these conversations, reflect on their practice, and have critical conversations in a longitudinal manner. Thank you again for the opportunity to talk with you today. If you have questions, I'd be happy to answer them at the conclusion of the presentation if you'd like to place them in the chat. Thanks again.
Hi, I'm back to talk about the Strengthening Mathematics Intervention project at EDC. I want to acknowledge the wonderful project team and also all the teachers who participated in our PD and our research. So math intervention is right at the center of our project title, so I want to start by just telling you our definition, which is there are classes that are in addition to general ed math classes during the school day. They're not instead of. They're not separate special ed math classes or multi-subject support classes. These are classes for students who are having mathematics difficulties, and it's important to keep in mind that in the middle grades there may be many different reasons why students might have unfinished learning from prior grades that have academic and non-academic reasons. The goal of the classes is to provide additional instruction, support, and time to help students grow mathematically, to address areas of unfinished learning and help them be more successful in their general ed math class. So I'd like to really situate you in these classes, so ask you to imagine you are observing a math intervention class. What would you hope to see? So I encourage you to put one or two ideas in the chat so we can think about our goals for these classes. Our project goals started with studying the national landscape. What's going on with these classes? How many people are implementing them? What structures are they using? And we noticed them locally, but we didn't know if they were happening nationally. So we did classroom observations, interviews, a national survey where we heard from 876 schools with grades 6 through 8. And we did find that, yes, indeed, this was a national trend with about 70% implementing these classes. We learned about goals, instructional practices, and challenges. And that gave us a wealth of information to create professional development for teachers of math intervention classes. So our course uses a combination of face-to-face, online, and small group virtual meetings. It's sustained over a school year so that teachers have multiple opportunities to apply ideas with their students and share with each other about their experiences. I want to talk a little about the professional learning needs of our target audience. They were predominantly mathematics educators. Some taught only intervention classes, some taught intervention classes, and gen ed classes. Unlike gen ed classes, most of the math intervention classes of the people we work with did not have a set scope or sequence or a program. In our national survey, about 70% of the math intervention teachers said they were creating or finding their own lessons. So this can be a plus for PD because people are eager to try things and people are really grappling with how to make the most of the intervention time to meet students' needs. Another thing that we learned from the survey were the two top challenges that teachers identified were that students had a wide range of learning needs and that some students had negative attitudes about being in the class, which is not surprising because if students have had difficulties with mathematics for years, they may not feel that good about having a second math class during the day. So teachers are really looking for ways to make that math intervention time a positive, engaging experience that will really support student learning. So I'm the third speaker. I want to put back up the central question just to remind you that we're here talking about PD ways to support educators in empowering students as math thinkers and doers. And I'll share some of our PD approaches. To start with, it's very important to put students at the center of the PD and to bring in their voices and work. We provide examples of student work, and we also want teachers to bring in their own students' work. So we use a focused student approach, which is something I've used for the past 20 years, and I really love it for PD, where each teacher picks 1 to 3 students that they're going to focus on during the course. They're collecting and examining that work. They're trying strategies and reflecting. And it means that when we get together, each teacher is bringing their student to the table. And it can help us avoid overgeneralizations about students can't do this or they can't do that. We can talk about the focus students and their strengths and needs and how they might respond to a particular math problem, and then use those students as proxies for planning for larger groups. If one of our goals, coming back to that central question, is really engaging students in doing meaningful mathematics in math intervention classes, then it's very important that in the PD we're engaging teachers themselves in doing meaningful mathematics, in using multiple representations, in sharing approaches with each other. And by doing so, they can deepen their own knowledge and their flexibility of approaches for responding to students. We also focus on using research-recommended instructional approaches from research on students with difficulties and disabilities, such as using manipulatives, visuals, connecting, concrete, semi-concrete, and abstract representation, exciting new research on the power of the number line to help students build understanding of fractions as numbers with magnitude, and using that number line, we love doing kinesthetic activities like walking the number line, creating clothesline number lines, folding them, and moving so that students are really actively engaged in the learning. So in the PD, we want teachers to do these themselves and then to also use them with their students. So one challenge that came up when we observed math intervention classes is teachers knew we were coming, so they picked an engaging math task, and then they would say at the end, students didn't talk as much as I thought they would. And I think we all know that having an engaging math task is not enough, and that we need to be intentional about ways to support student communication, especially where math intervention has groups of students who may be very hesitant to share their ideas. They may be worried about being incorrect, and in their general ed math classes, they may stay below the radar, knowing if they wait a little, someone else will raise their hand. So we focused on a variety of strategies, and part of it is related to the math task. So I love card sorts because they have that tactile feel. They also have that entryway. I can move the card, place it, change it, has that rough draft thinking feeling, but you can do a card sort, and I could be doing it with Jessica, and we could be doing it silently. So having a protocol where I'm saying I put 3/5 in this category because, and Jessica saying I agree because, can really help getting that conversation going. Similarly, we love using Midi whiteboard questioning, which is from the work of Malcolm Swan. It also brings in that rough draft thinking. It has the prompt. It starts always with show me an example of. So here's an example, a shape with a large perimeter and a small area. So I hope you've all drawing something in your mind. Here's one example. And some of the benefits of the whiteboard questioning is that students can really hold up their whiteboard, point to their work. It adds a concrete visual element to the discussion. And again, it has that rough draft thinking of like it's easy to erase and change your ideas. And I love the prompts because they allow for multiple solutions and multiple approaches. As I mentioned earlier, one of the major challenges teachers brought up was that students have a range of math learning needs. So that can feel overwhelming, and what helps reduce those feelings or overwhelming is using formative assessment approaches to learn more about students' thinking, what their strengths and difficulties are. And so we've been using probes in our work for about the past 10 years. In general ed math teachers, they weren't designed specifically for math intervention, but we found them very helpful. They focus on a specific topic in mathematics. This focuses on comparing decimals. They each have a selected response and an explanation prompt, because we know that students can have correct answers with flawed reasoning and vice versa. They focus, as I mentioned, on a specific area of mathematics to provide information at a small grain size that teachers can use to inform instruction. They give insight into students' understandings. Here are some examples for the comparing decimals probe. And here are some examples of student difficulties, such as focusing on the number of digits rather than the value of the digits. Teachers use the probes with their students as part of the course, and then they bring in examples from their focus students to share with each other and discuss. We use a process similar to what Judy said of starting with what you notice and focusing on strengths. And we also think it's important to have that wondering and that curiosity about students' understandings. We ask teachers to annotate their work, so when they share in those Zoom meetings, as you're doing now, there's a visual that everyone can look at and focus on during the discussion. So similar to what Jessica talked about, we also do student interviews, but they're narrower. We use the probes, so teachers are using one probe. They take about 10 minutes, and the goal is for students to think aloud as they're working on the probe, and for the teachers to really listen and ask questions, but not provide instruction. We support teachers through a whole interview process of planning, conducting, analyzing, and using findings to target instruction. Here's an example, just giving you a feel of the interview, but I'm going to move on because of time. I want to share some quotes, because teachers identified the interviews as the most, for many of them, it was the most impactful assignment of the PD. So what I love about this quote is the teachers pointing out that it not only helped her understand, but she was so happy to see how excited students were to share their knowledge and to do the interviews. And teachers told us that some students asked them if they needed any more interviews. This one, the teacher is really reflecting on their own process and the importance of listening, taking the time to listen. As part of the interview process, people have the interview findings and it's kind of like, okay, well, so what? Where are we going with this? So we put a lot of attention on targeting instruction by providing guiding questions and tools for thinking about what mathematics are you going to target, setting specific math learning goals, choosing activities and approaches to support learning, and gathering evidence of progress. So the targeted instruction is very powerful, and I love this quote about using thinking as stepping stones and an opportunity to meet students where they are and build on that. And this teacher is talking about the interview process is a lot of work, but people felt really proud of what they accomplished and that it was worthwhile for their students. So to close, as we move forward, we want to build on our own strengths of the PD, and some of those are the probes and interviews. And I say that partly because of how many people go on to use the probes beyond the PD, and that a large percentage of the teachers said that they wanted to continue doing interviews or apply the interview process to the way they led discussions, that it really carried over beyond the assignment. We also learned ways to support teachers in carrying out these assignments, and we really found that doing more than one is important. You might feel uncomfortable after one interview, but after doing 4, people were ready to go on and do more. Another thing in the feedback from teachers, we want to focus on things they want to do more professional learning, such as how to integrate these interviews into their classes, more on planning lessons, and on supporting students in self-assessment and self-advocacy. So I'm going to call everybody back, and Karen.
Thank you. I think everybody will be on in a second. Thank you, everyone. That was great. I want to just note a few things that were in the chat from people, more comments that were really useful, and you may want to jump off of those, and then I do have a few questions to share. People noted the importance of teachers as doers and how that transfers to students as doers. Many people appreciated the strength-based approaches that all of the projects sort of focused on, using learning progressions to move to the next level, how important that is, and observing and building upon what students are able to do instead of focusing on assessments. And then also allowing for students to do more talking and understanding student thinking, spending time and focus understanding student thinking instead of trying to fix it, and you can be more responsive in that way. And I think, Jessica, in particular to yours, there was a comment about the importance of nonlinearity of student development, how important it is to remember that. So there are a couple of big questions, and there may be more that you all have, and feel free to write them in, and I will keep looking. But one is, I'll tell you both of them, and then you two all could start. What were some connections between what the researchers identified in people's, paras, teachers, student behaviors, and learning? So again, what were some connections between behaviors and learning? And the second one was, how did race and ethnicity of students and teachers play out in all of the different contexts? So do you want to talk first about some connections between behaviors and learning first?
I'd like to just make one comment and then pass it over to Judy, because I know that came in her part of the presentation. But that's one thing I really like about the Focus Student project and thinking about students as math learners, because sometimes I think what's most salient are students' kind of school behaviors, whether they're handing in their homework, things like that, and not as much about what they're like as a mathematics learner. So I did find that the Focus Student assignment helps teachers to learn more about that, and that was beneficial.
I'm not sure if I can go beyond what I talked about too much, but it was interesting that it came up in many ways, and Karen, you might be able to add something too, is that the parents really noticing that some of the students that they might have thought were kind of difficult, when they were able to meet their learning needs, the behaviors, I don't know if they disappeared, but they greatly lessened, and they were able to focus and stay on task more. And I think that positive, the strengths-based approach really connects to behavior as well, because you know how it is. The kids that are not paying attention, they're always being told, listen, and all those negative things. So I think this strengths-based approach in the math and the intervention is really critical.
I would agree, and I would just add that I think teachers began to make some connections between para behaviors and para learning. As they learned more math and as they developed confidence in math, they really sort of seemed very different in the classroom. They really looked like and acted like educators as opposed to just being the role of monitoring students. So then teachers really saw them quite differently in what they could bring to the students and ask them to do new things and more things. I want to talk about race and ethnicity of students and how it played out in these different contexts. And if the person who asked that wants to add more, please feel free to write something more.
And before we move on to that one, I realized I was muted.
Okay.
So I just wanted to jump in really quickly on the last one. Yeah, I'm sitting here talking away and I'm like, oh. No, I just wanted to say that, a former mentor of mine would often make the comment that behavior and academics are cyclical. So I think that's important to remember. But something that I found was that especially in, the more we listen to and give voice to students, the more they feel like, again, I'm very anecdotal, but the more they seem to feel like they are empowered to talk about how they think, and the more they start to seem to feel that you value how they think. And I think that's huge, because if I feel valued and I feel heard, then I'm going to engage in perhaps different ways than if I didn't feel that way. So that was a takeaway from our work.
And I think Karen's right about the paras, because they were not heard either. And I remember when we did bring them to conferences to present with us or to the meeting with the director of equity, the fact that people were listening to them. The very first session that we had, one of the paras said, we're just the paras, we don't count. And we said, well, with us, you're educators and teachers just like anyone else. So I think that really did help them shift their identity. Well, in terms of the ethnicity and the race, I think I did mention that one of the assets the paras have is that many of our paras were from the same community, and the connections they make with the families and students are really important. We would ask them what they found most rewarding about their job, and they would say they loved seeing their students in the neighborhood. They would sometimes invite them in for cookies, and they were proud that they were educators, that the students would actually see them more as teachers perhaps than some of the fellow professionals. So that connection was really important. And sometimes, I remember one day the para was doing subtraction, and she said to the student, I saw you in Walmart with your mom last week. What did you buy? How much change did you get? She was able to bring in that community context.
I don't know why I'm lit up because I'm not quite ready to talk. So.
A specific question. Oh, sorry.
I think in our project, context became, sorry, I think the phone is causing a delay. I think in terms of our context, in our project, the context became extremely important. It permeated throughout the tasks and activities used both in the research and with teachers, both in and out of the context of schools and the context of the graduate courses, relating to students and opening up curriculum tasks in ways that make sense to students and allow them to connect to what makes sense became very powerful throughout our work. I'm not sure if that answers the question or not, but that's what's coming to mind immediately.
And one thing I would talk about is we also did, as part of our project, some work with math leaders, principals, and administrators, because one big concern about math intervention classes is overrepresentation of students of color in these classes and in special education. So it's very important to look at the decision-making processes of how students are identified to enter the classes, and also what the exit criteria are. How we don't want students in intervention forever. The goal is for it to have an end, for students to no longer need it. So that was one aspect that where I think addresses part of the question.
Great, thank you. There was a very specific question about whether the data of findings from the National Survey of Intervention Teachers is available somewhere.
Yeah, it's on our website, and the link is in this presentation. And if someone wants to get it before the slides, you could just email me.
Thank you. Someone is typing.
I think we had some questions about parents and teachers learning together. I think I noticed that, and we would love to do more of that. The challenge is really the scheduling. It was hard enough to get the paras to PD, and with the session that we had was during the summer, so it's possible maybe to do a bit more of that. But that's the real challenge, is the scheduling. So we'd love to do more.
And yes, yeah, we absolutely would. And someone did mention in the chat, or maybe two people, the importance of finding follow-up opportunities, but also others then responded that they had included paras in their teacher PLCs, and that they make sure that their PD days always include invitations to paras. So those are critically important, and thank you for mentioning those as other avenues to include them. Yes, someone mentioned the challenge of scheduling, and you are so right. I think that may be it for questions. If anyone has a final question, please type it in, and I'll peek. Lots of comments about with thanks to all of you for what you provided in terms of information about the project, some ideas, and many of which resonate, it seems, with this crowd, and hoping that the work continues.
So I know we all welcome the opportunity to continue the conversation, so please feel free to contact us. There were lots of great ideas in the chat. I'm looking forward to reading it more, and please be in touch with us.
Yes, agree. Always happy to share more information, materials, anything. I'm an email away, so appreciate the opportunity to share today.
We would concur with that as well.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.